And that's enough about RTB, because what we're really here for today is to hear Dr. Leslie Wickman, who is with us from sunny California. She holds a master's degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering and a doctoral degree in human factors and biomechanics, both from Stanford University. She's an internationally renowned research scientist, engineering consultant, author, and inspirational speaker. She has lectured around the world on astronaut training and operations, environmental stewardship, and the interface between science and theology, and more. She was an engineer for Lockheed Missiles and Space Company for over 10 years, where she worked on NASA's Hubble Space Telescope and International Space Station programs. She was the executive director for the American Scientific Affiliation for 4 years. She dedicates time now to Biola's corporate affiliates program and her nonprofit, Starry Nights, Inc. She occasionally takes on special projects involving national aerospace and defense issues, including climate change, impacts on national security, and future human spaceflight missions and technologies. Incredibly, as if she had time to do anything else, she's also an athlete. She's competed in beach doubles volleyball, indoor beach volleyball. She also competed in women's professional tackle football, where she was involved in the team that won the Women's World Bowl. But today, she's here to talk to us about environmental stewardship and creation care. And we're glad to have you.
Thanks so much. It's good to be with you today, even virtually. So this topic is one that's especially near and dear to my heart. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, very close to a First Nations reservation. My father was a forester as well as a Boy Scout wilderness leader, and I had summer jobs throughout high school and college working in the woods. And I still take every opportunity that I can to enjoy the great outdoors. And just a few years ago, I was privileged to be asked by Dr. Cal DeWitt to join him as a founding member of the Academy of Evangelical Scientists and Ethicists, working to promote environmental stewardship and creation care. So this again is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Randy Van Draat from Calvin College as another inspiration for this lecture, and I'll refer to some of his material later. And just as a Christian in a secular world, it sometimes feels like we're constantly being inundated with the world's take on environmental issues, with rhetoric about saving Mother Earth, or the Gaia hypothesis that the entire Earth and everything on it should be thought of as a single organism. But what should our perspective as Christ followers be? Well, personally, I think we have a higher calling from God to be good stewards of his creation. And we Christians really ought to be leading the charge to care for the earth and all that's in it. Let's go to the next slide, please. Hopefully we can, there we go, good. So various verses in scripture speak of the value that God puts on creation. And there are two passages that have really had the greatest impact on my personal view of creation. And the first is at the end of the creation story in Genesis 1, verse 31, which says, God saw all that he made, and it was very good. So if God looked at what he'd created and thought it was good, how much more should we respect and care for it? The second passage is John 3:16. Of course, we all know that verse by heart. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. One thing that we don't often think about, though, is that the word that's translated world in our Bibles in the Greek is cosmos, which includes every created thing in the entire universe. So just think for a minute about what that means. God loved all of his creation so much that he sent Jesus to die for it, to reconcile it all to himself. And from this perspective, God must really love and value everything he made, including, of course, humans. Let's go to the next slide. There are a number of environmental themes throughout the Bible, with references in both the Old and New Testaments. And William Johnson at Arizona State University put this list of themes together. So I want to give credit where credit's due. But the first theme is creation, which is by God, who called it good in Genesis 1, as we just talked about. The second is stewardship, where God gives humans responsibility for his creation, again in Genesis 1. The third is provision of God for humankind through creation, as in Genesis 1:29. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. The fourth theme is pleasure of God in his creation, not only in John 3:16 that we just went over, but also in Revelation 4:11, which reads, worthy, O Master, yes, our God, take the glory, the honor, the power. You created it all. It was created because you wanted it. Fifth theme is praise of all of creation praises the creator, as in Psalm 69:34. You heavens praise him, earth, also ocean and all things that swim in it. The sixth theme is authority of God over his creation, as in Luke 8:25. And he said to them, where is your faith? They were fearful and amazed, saying to one another, who then is this that he commands even the winds and the waters, and they obey him? The seventh theme is the witness of nature to God's authority and provision, as in Acts 14:17. Yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your heart with joy. And 8, the consequences to creation, including humans, for man's wickedness, as in Revelation 11:18, that reads, the nations were angry, and the time for your anger has come. The time has come to judge the dead. It is time to reward your servants, the prophets, and your own people, and those who honor you. There is a reward for all your people, both great and small. It is time to destroy those who destroy the earth. Powerful words. Excuse me just one second. Okay, and finally, the perspective that God is above his creation, as in Psalm 113, verses 3-6. From the rising of the sun to the place where it sets, the name of the Lord is to be praised. The Lord is exalted over all the nations, his glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God, the one who sits enthroned on high, who stoops down to look on the heavens and the earth? So let's go to the next slide, please. And this cartoon is sad, but very possibly true. So hopefully you can read the text there. I'm going to have to zoom in a bit myself to read it, but it essentially says, the threat to which delicate balance will spur an era of energy conservation. So Matthew 6:21 reads, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And it seems like the price of fossil fuels these days is actually forcing more people to think about energy conservation. But let's hope and pray that what we treasure most is not found in our pocketbooks. Let's go to the next slide, please. And this planet that we call home is unique, at least within our solar system. And even the extrasolar planets that we've found so far mostly are quite a bit larger than the Earth. And we are not able to see or detect things well enough to know whether they're in fact life-friendly. But it's safe to say that our Earth is rare within our solar system, at least. Some of the things that make it so rare are the fact that we have abundant water in all 3 physical phases. We have a protective, insulating atmosphere with substantial oxygen. We have a magnetic field that deflects dangerous charged particles from space. And we have the perfect distance from the sun to provide temperate climates and adequate energy, along with many other unique characteristics. Actually, stay on that slide for a second, if you would. But these components, the earth, the water, and the atmosphere, and the physical, chemical, and biological processes that govern their interactions make up our biosphere, the sphere around the earth where life exists. These elements These components provide what we need, not only to survive, but to flourish and thrive. In fact, one of the things that I think, we hear a lot about in the search for life-friendly planets is that the planet would be the perfect distance from its sun in order to provide a temperate zone where liquid water can exist. And I think sometimes we tend to think of the conditions on planets, Earth being the prime example of ones where
Recording stopped.
we got
Recording in progress.
we got lucky or something to that effect. But if we just lucky, we would expect kind of minimally bio-friendly conditions. But when we look at all the provisions that God has made for us on the planet Earth to not just survive, but to thrive, we realize we're not just some biology experiment. And to me, that speaks to not only a God of power who created, but a God of love who shows his love through what he's given us. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Aside from the physical attributes of our planet, our innate human curiosity inevitably leads us to ponder the bigger questions of who does this planet and its resources belong to, and what is the proper role of humans on the Earth, and how can humans live on the Earth in a long-term sustainable way. Let's go to the next slide. So consider this passage from the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. And as it turns out, this is a nice acknowledgement of the Earth's interconnected and synergistic systems. Let's go to the next slide, please. Today, we are faced with a number of threats to God's creation that he blessed and called good in the book of Genesis. This partial list includes some of the major issues that we're currently concerned with: energy resources, water pollution, water resources, air pollution, climate change, deforestation, and loss of biodiversity. And we don't have time to go into detail on each of these, but I'll try to cover the highlights fairly quickly. Let's go to the next slide, please. So first, let's look at energy. The present rate of energy consumption, all of the Earth's fossil fuel energy, much of it in the form of coal, will be consumed in less than 270 years. U.S. oil production peaked over 3 decades ago, and global oil production is expected to peak at least within the next decade. And the bottom line is that fossil fuels aren't going to last forever, so we need to develop and utilize more sustainable energy sources such as solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, or even nuclear technologies, especially if the current energy rate of consumption continues, never mind increasing with growing global population and industrialization. Let's go to the next slide, please. With respect to water, there's a growing demand for safe, clean water as overall populations grow, and there's greater awareness of the waterborne diseases that are spread through the use of contaminated drinking and wash water. 18% of the world's population has inadequate water, and 40% lack sanitation treatment to maintain even the most basic health standards. In developing countries, 80% of sickness is directly attributable to water-related diseases that we take for granted as being easily preventable. Let's go to the next slide. And this thin blue line of our atmosphere seen from space is essential for our existence. Yet the quantity of man-made pollutants is now significant enough to contaminate the atmosphere, leading to air pollution as well as acid rain, with their negative effects on health and well-being, not only of humans, animals, and plants, but even on inanimate man-made objects. Let's go to the next slide, please. And some people might ask, isn't what we hear about climate change or global warming just a natural variation in Earth's weather patterns? But humans have enjoyed a long stretch of time with relatively stable temperatures for the last 10,000 years or so. And it's important to remember that during the Ice Age, when sheets of ice covered Oregon, it was only 4 degrees Celsius cooler. During the 20th century, the increase was about 0.6 degrees C, or 1 full degree Fahrenheit. And the duration of warming during the 20th century was much greater than any of the previous 9 centuries. And the current rate of warming is unprecedented in at least 20,000 years. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, these photos provide a visual indication of the rate of deforestation that's occurring. The amount of clear-cut area now exceeds the area of remaining rainforest timber stands. Let's go to the next slide. And I realize I'm going through this very quickly, but there's a lot of information to cover, and I want to leave time for questions at the end. So the cause of species declines include loss and degradation of natural habitats, including some of the deforestation issues that we just looked at, new species introduction into existing habitats, overhunting, overfishing, disease and parasites, changing ecological interactions, and of course, climate change. Let's go to the next slide. So why should we care about the protection of other species? There are 4 prevalent secular approaches to this question that are outlined by Dr. Van Draat at Calvin. First, we have the anthropocentric ethic, which says that species are of utilitarian, aesthetic, educational, and/or spiritual value to humans. So as indicated in the name, the anthropocentric ethic is human-centered. Let's see. Next, we have the biocentric ethic, which claims that all living things have intrinsic value and that humans must recognize and respect that value. Third, we have the deep ecology position, which states that the holistic quality of nature and our utter dependence on it must be respected. And finally, we have one that's called ecofeminism, which says that the nurturing quality of nature must be emphasized and respected. Let's go to the next slide, please. Professor Max Oelschlaeger, who's a philosopher from the University of North Texas, writes that most of Western civilization holds the following perspective relative to the environment. And again, this is across Western civilization, not specific to the US or Christians. So this perspective basically holds that non-human creation has instrumental or human-oriented value only. Claims of biocentric value have no place. It also states that short-term economic interests override long-term concerns, and that environmental risk, including species loss, are acceptable if they are economically beneficial. Furthermore, environmental risks, including species losses, pose no limits to growth, only challenges that require technological solutions. And that science and technology will ultimately allow us to maintain essential processes of the biosphere within acceptable limits. And the politics of self-interest will be sufficient to assure the best uses of technology. So if he's actually correct about this is not very encouraging news. It's a very utilitarian approach. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So getting back to our question, why should we care about the earth? I have one word that sums it up completely: stewardship. But what exactly is stewardship? Well, stewardship is management or care exercised by one individual on behalf of another, usually the owner. So Christians broadly view themselves as stewards of creation. So where does this idea of stewardship come from? Well, as we talked about previously, God gives humans responsibility over creation in Genesis 1, verse 28, where he says, God blessed them, saying, prosper, reproduce, fill the earth, take charge. Be responsible for fish in the sea and birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. And the Reverend Jim Ball of the Evangelical Environmental Network refers to 4 distinct worldviews that various Christians hold relative to stewardship of God's creation. And these include the wise use, the anthropocentric stewardship, the caring management, and the servant stewardship perspectives. Let's go to the next slide, please. In the wise use worldview, as outlined by Dr. Ball, as well as Randy Van Drad, God is seen as the ultimate provider of resources for human use, and the goal is to maximize human benefit. Humans are seen as the rulers that God has put in charge of creation, and the rest of creation, ROC for short, merely provides resources for human use. The value of the rest of creation is in human attributed value only, because only humans have intrinsic value. So this describes the wise use worldview. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, okay, so sorry, I'm having trouble making sure that you're on the same slide that I'm on. So yeah, I've got it now. So let's see. So as for the interaction between the humans and the rest of creation in this view of wise use, humans are to make effective and efficient use of the rest of creation. And the emphases are stewardship rhetoric, which is really just a cover for the exploitation of the rest of creation. So even though wise use sounds good, it's actually emphasizing kind of a rationale for exploitation. The dominant attitude of this worldview is extreme arrogance in the status of humans relative to the rest of creation. Okay, let's go to the, yeah, I think you're there already, anthropocentric. Yes. You might be, yeah. Okay. See, can you go back one slide? I just want to make sure that we're on the same. Okay, no, you're on the right one. Go ahead forward again. There you go. Thank you. Sorry. So next we have the anthropocentric stewardship worldview, where God is seen as a creator and owner of creation. The goal is to maximize human good while conserving the rest of creation. And humans are seen as kings with power over creation. The rest of creation is seen as providing resources, but is still God's property. The moral status of the rest of creation is that in recognizing that sin is disobeying God, wasteful use of the rest of creation could be sinful. And the value of the rest of creation is in the value attributed by God and by humans, with humans having the highest value and coming first before the rest of creation. As for the interaction between humans and the rest of creation, humans are to take what they need, but also improve the rest of creation. And this worldview has various emphases. First, human redemption has implications for the rest of creation. And second, meeting divine commands and leaving resources for future generations are key ethical guidelines. The dominant attitude of this worldview, though, is still arrogance towards the rest of creation. So let's go to the next slide. And this one is the caring management worldview, where God is seen as the creator and owner of creation. He loves the rest of creation, but loves humans more. The goal is that humans and creation flourish under caring management. Humans are seen as lords and servants of creation. The rest of creation is seen as resources and fellow creatures. The moral status of the rest of creation is that it can be sinned against. And the value of the rest of creation is that it has intrinsic value, but less value than humans. And as for the interaction between humans and the rest of creation, humans are to care for it and use it sustainably. Human plans should be carefully weighed against the impacts on the rest of creation. And the emphases of this perspective of caring management are on cosmic redemption, as we saw in John 3:16. And the second, the stress on human uniqueness as being made in the image of God. And finally, the responsibility for the rest of creation that humans hold. And the dominant attitude of this worldview is, instead of arrogance, as we saw in the past too, paternalism towards the rest of creation. So let's go to the next slide, please, which represents the servant stewardship worldview, where God is seen as a creator and redeemer of all. He loves and desires shalom, or peace, for all of creation, and the goal is the flourishing of all creation. Humans are seen as servants, keepers, and preservers of the rest of creation, and the rest of creation is seen as fellow members of Christ's creation. The moral status of the rest of creation is that it can be sinned against, and the value of the rest of creation is that it has intrinsic value, not just utilitarian value. As for the interaction between humans and the rest of creation, humans are to live so as to preserve and nurture creation, and it has various emphases on cosmic redemption, as in John 3:16, and second, human uniqueness is downplayed. Rather, Christ-like servanthood is stressed. And finally, human responsibility is emphasized over human priority. And the dominant attitude of this worldview is humility. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So one of the things that I love to leave students with in this conversation is a challenge from Professor Max Oelschlaeger. He says, I think of religion, or more specifically the church, as being more important in the effort to conserve life on earth than all the politicians and experts put together. The church may be, in fact, our last best chance. My conjecture is this: there are no solutions for the systemic cause of eco-crisis, at least in democratic societies, apart from religious narrative. So I think that's just a beautiful statement. And again, it ties in with our charge as Christians to be caretakers of creation. Let's go to the next slide. So a lot of times people think, I'm just one person. What difference can I possibly make as just one person? But I'd like to encourage you to believe that one passionate, inspired person can make a huge difference. And certainly, if everyone does their own part, together we can make a huge positive difference. On the other hand, if everyone takes the position that what I do doesn't matter, that will make a huge negative difference. One of my students, in hearing this conversation, hearing this presentation, responded to the issue by saying, instead of asking hopelessly, what can I do? I'm just one person. We should really be asking, what should I do? Which is, of course, the classical ethical dilemma that we should all be thinking of. So let's go to the next slide if we can. Let's take this one step further and make it personal by asking ourselves these questions. How do, or better yet, how ought we to view God relative to creation? Is he merely a provider of resources for human use, or is he a creator, lover, and redeemer of all creation? How ought we to see the value and the moral status of the rest of creation? Does it have value as resources for humans only, or does it have God-given value as fellow members of creation worthy of Christ's redemption? What ought to be the human role relative to the rest of creation? Is it merely to be users and exploiters, or is it to be servants, preservers, nurturers, even prayers and teachers for others? What ought to be our attitude toward the rest of creation? Should it be condescension or arrogance, or rather humility, appreciation, contentment, delight, and care? Once we've answered all these questions for ourselves, then the next and vital step is to figure out what actions are required to best put into practice our own personal environmental code of ethics. So with that, you can go to the next slide with a list of references, and I'll take questions.